Anita, Mohammed, I'm so excited to have you both here with me in studio. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having me.
So Anita, let's start with you, because a lot of people, when they think about Canada, they don't think about poverty. So one common myth is poverty does not exist in Canada. How would you respond to that claim?
Well, I would say that, in fact, we love where we live. We love our city, our country, but the truth is that our dynamics and our context has been changing. And here in the GTA, our research has shown us that we are, in fact, the child poverty capital in Canada. Wow. The housing and affordability and income inequality capital is right here in the GTA. And poverty looks different in our community. It's not sometimes as apparent or as visible as it might be in other places. And our research has shown that it does exist. And our work is all about fighting poverty in all of its forms in the best ways that we can, so everybody can have a better quality of life.
Mohammed, what does poverty look like in Canada? Anita has said it looks a little bit different. So what do you think it looks like?
I think poverty is quite invisible in Canada. I think when we think about poverty, we think about people who are homeless or who are who don't have the opportunities to get ahead. But what we're seeing an increase of is people who are working poor. So people who are living in their cars, who are sleeping in their cars, and they're getting ready in the community centers to get to work the next day. That type of poverty people don't think exists. But when you go to places like in Peel or in York, you see that as the most known way of homelessness and poverty. And I think that you see poverty in a lot of different places. In Toronto, you see it very geographically centered around certain
we see
areas.
people, we drive around in our cars or walking around and we see people panhandling, as we call it.
Yeah.
So that's what we think of as poverty, right?
Yeah.
But I think what you're saying is that poverty goes way beyond that.
Well, I think poverty, there's a lot of people who are poor, who are just scraping by. People are working 3-4 jobs sometimes. They're dropping their kids off to school in the morning. They're going straight to work. Their kids are going into after school care. They get picked up at 5. The parents pick them up from 5. They feed them, then go back to work. And then maybe a grandmother or a grandparent is then looking after them. And then they're there till about midnight, and that cycle continues. And that's become the lived reality of many people who are new to Canada, who are racialized, and where the expectation of being able to work your way out of poverty is no longer as easily accessible as it used to be. And I think people are really struggling to find new ways to get ahead.
So one common myth is that if you have a job, you can't be poor. So you're saying the opposite, that you can.
Absolutely. We see the type of work that's increasing right now with precarious employment, or people. So, for example, if you're trying to buy a house and you don't have, and when you go file for apply for a mortgage, and you aren't able to demonstrate that you have sustainable income, is any bank going to lend you any money? No. If you're trying to buy a car or even have a kid, but you don't know if you actually have money to be able to pay it, a month or 2 months or 2 years from now, because your employment contract only says you're there for a year, how much can you actually plan your life? And that you're seeing people.
You're talking about buying a house. I'm thinking about rent.
Right.
Even when
Exactly.
you try to rent, I mean, there are all these conditions, and you have to show that you have a certain income that can sustain your lifestyle.
And I think that's the hidden nature of it, because you don't see it and you think people are working, but we often don't know what our colleagues in our workplaces are actually going through. And there is such a stigma in terms of, poverty or homelessness. We became aware of this actually a couple of years ago in Peel, where we started to see more and more people who were working but couldn't afford, for various reasons, had lost their home, whether it was marital breakdown or loss of employment or illness. And then they had a job, but they couldn't afford to keep a home. And so what they were doing was they kept the car, because the car was their ability to survive. And then they were living in the car. That was their home. But they needed the job to keep that. That's the face of poverty. But you wouldn't see that person as they were walking in the street or working, and you would think that that's what poverty looks like. Poverty is also, you know, the kids in school who are sometimes come to school without a lunch in their lunch bag, right? Or you see them sometimes in the wintertime and they're not wearing boots or they don't have a coat. And you may think, oh, look at that, you know, how irresponsible. But it's actually people who can't afford some of the very basic things for their children, and so they're making do. Even if you're working, the income isn't enough to take care of all of your needs, because the housing, in fact, is the cost of housing is so high.
It's prohibitive, yeah.
It takes away from everything else. And so those are some of the nuances in the way that it manifests itself across the region in terms of what it looks like.
So Anita, can you tell me how poverty looks in Canada in terms of, you know, what sort of communities are most affected by poverty?
Well, we have done some research looking at things like precarious employment, income inequality, to understand those are predictors, those are important aspects that we need to understand in terms of what's happening to communities. Jobs are an important part of that. Income is an important part of that, but it's not everything. But we wanted to understand that to see who is being impacted by precarious jobs or who is being impacted by income inequality. And what we found is that age, gender, and race actually matter. They make a difference in terms of how well you will do, the kind of jobs that you will have, the kind of income that you will have, and that's disturbing because it means that in some cases for people who are racialized or people who are immigrants and have been here for even some time, even 20 years, when we look at the income gap, it's quite stark. And so we have to look at why that is, what are some of the systemic issues that are playing into that, and what are some of the solutions that we can drive home. And so our work in our community as United Way is, when we look at those factors of age, gender, and race, is to ensure that our supports in the community are there to support those that are vulnerable, those that are marginalized. So we have 270 agencies across the GTA that we fund for various programs, and it's really about supporting them in their time of need, but many of our supports are actually about prevention, so that we can ensure that kids have all the opportunities that they need, that parents are supported, that they have networks in their community, that they have the opportunities to remove social isolation and connect and feel that they belong and they're participating in the community.
Now, Mohammed, you know, there's some people, one very common myth that people put forward is, you know, with our social security system, it's not possible to have poverty in Canada. So is our social security system doing a good enough job helping people in a situation of poverty?
No, absolutely not. I think that when we look at what social assistance looks like, when we talk about welfare and welfare rates, they're incredibly low, especially when you're disabled. They're very low. Access to social housing is very, I don't even know what I think the wait time to get social housing in Toronto is like
maybe
decades.
like 20 years, right? Yeah. Maybe more than that.
Welfare system that allows people to get ahead is it's crumbling, and government policy is actually putting it further back. There was a basic income pilot that was being presented by which allowed people a certain amount of income to be able to have a sense of predictability, to be able to build a life forward. And that project was completely cut by the recent government. And I think that we need to think about poverty better in terms of like it being a societal problem that we want to actually address. And you know, right now, I don't think that we're going in the right direction.
You know, Anita, sometimes people think of poverty as someone's personal choice. So they say, well, you're making the wrong choices, that's why you're poor. How would you respond to that claim?
I think I would say that opportunity and hope and supports are really important in the way that your life and the life of your family and how you can thrive are connected, and that when you are living in poverty, sometimes you don't have access to supports and services in ways that can make a difference for you. And it's a matter of survival, and the people, in fact, I was yesterday at a meeting with the Peel Poverty Reduction Committee in Peel Region. I'm the co-chair for that, and we were talking about the kinds of barriers that people face and how difficult it is. And in fact, these individuals are probably the most resilient individuals that I know, because they have to make do with practically nothing to survive for themselves and their families. And the amount of stress that generates, the amount of worry and concern that creates for people in terms of not only how are they going to make the month, but how are they going to survive that day for their kids, and how are they going to get through the next day is really an important part of that. And it's really about us, what we as a society think is important, and how we support people and make sure that they have access to services. I mean, people come here because they want a better quality of life. They want to thrive. They want to establish businesses. They want good jobs. You know, we were saying earlier that when we came, we were education and buying a house and settling successfully were important markers. But those opportunities are no longer available to us. And you can be well educated, but you just don't have those opportunities. So it's more systemic, it's more deeper than that in terms of how people can be supported to make a difference, how people can live and have a better quality of life. And everybody that I have met through my work and through my volunteer work in the community, it's all been about how can I lift my family out of this, and how do I make a difference here? And so it's about ensuring that people have that, those supports with dignity and respect, and that as a society we're valuing those things, that poverty impacts our economy. It's between $4.5 to $5.5 billion. The cost of poverty is phenomenal, and that's not productive. That's not something that where we can say that we're thriving. If all of us are not thriving, then there's something that's significantly missing. There's a gap, and so I think those things are important in terms of how a person goes through their day-to-day life, but also how, as a community, as a society, what exists to eradicate poverty and homelessness. And those solutions are there.
Mohammed, Anita, thank you so much for joining me on Let the Quran Speak. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure.